This playlist will collect together and organize the individual component modules of this lecture covering the material in the chapter, What is Critical Thinking? So to start with, welcome. What I intend to do in this lecture is to outline the structure of the course, the rationale behind structuring the course that way, and give you insights into why it is that this is a good way to approach critical thinking. And to start off, I'll start off in the same way that I do in the chapter, by talking about two misconceptions about critical thinking. So administrators, some instructors, curriculum developers, and oftentimes students have these misconceptions about critical thinking. To start, people often think that by taking a critical thinking course, students can dramatically and uniformly improve as thinkers across the board, as well as gain immunity from a wide array of reasoning errors, and they can do this systematically in their everyday life. This simply is not true. The second misconception that I note at the beginning of this chapter is that the ability to dramatically and uniformly improve reasoning exhausts the subject matter of critical thinking and constitutes the sole source of its utility. And this too, I think, is very much a misconception. So the conception of critical thinking that I advocate really rejects both of these views. And in doing so, it adopts an approach to critical thinking that differs pretty dramatically from the vast majority of books and courses out there under this title. And specifically, one of the most important features of this course is that I insist that critical thinking involves more than merely arguments. A typical critical thinking class will spend an inordinate amount of time, not some time, but the vast majority of time, in the activities in developing the skills of identifying, extracting, and evaluating arguments. And specifically, they tend to focus on deductive arguments. These are important skills that students will need to cultivate, skills that we introduce in this course, but they do not exhaust or in any way comprise the entirety of a critical thinking curriculum. And why is that? Well, a critical thinking course really isn't a panacea for reasoning. I can no more turn you into Spock or Data or a super rational human being by having you take this critical thinking course than I could take, I don't know, Ted Bundy or any serial killer or sociopath and turn them into a ethical, healthy member of society by having them take an introduction to ethics class. The information that is given in these classes helps, but there are important barriers to dramatically and systematically improving reasoning and decision-making performance across all sorts of contexts. To start with, most of the inferences that we make are initially made and oftentimes exhaustively made by innate, automatic, and largely unconscious, relatively inflexible human reasoning and decision-making tendencies. And I'll give you a bunch of examples in just a little bit to illustrate this point, because people oftentimes don't really believe you when you say this. Moreover, human beings' ability to consciously solve problems, that is, to counteract these innate and unconscious processes, is really dramatically limited by the limitations to a working memory capacity. In order to consciously solve problems, you have to be able to get that information into your working memory and engage in the inference, decision-making, evaluation of that information within working memory. But as we'll see, working memory capacity is extremely limited in human beings, and so it is a real bottleneck. Finally, there's a third barrier to dramatic improvement in your ability to make inferences or decisions across the board. And that's that the world is complex, very complex. And real world problems tend to be extremely complex. They tend to involve a lot of information. They tend to involve information that has complex interrelationships. They tend to involve complex inferences as well. And so these three features are really drags on our ability to improve our thinking that cannot be overcome just by some knowledge, instruction, and some skills practicing. So let's take a step back and look at this a little more carefully. What do I mean when I say native human reasoning abilities are relatively inflexible? Well, over the course of about 4.4 to 7 million years of human and proto-human evolution, our brains evolved to solve problems using a very specific set of strategies that we didn't have to be taught and we didn't have to learn, strategies that emerge as a result of normal development, ways of processing information. And these strategies are common to all people and not dependent upon intelligence. Now, these strategies were designed to solve specific sorts of problems in specific kinds of environments. And as a result, they've made assumptions and trade-offs that have made them strong in some respects and weak in others, capable of solving problems quickly, efficiently, and well in some cases, and subject to systematic error in other cases. And one of the weaknesses of human reasoning and decision abilities is just that they are automatic and unconscious. That is, we process a lot of information unconsciously, outside of our awareness, and maybe semi-consciously, just barely parts of them coming into our awareness. And as a result, our conscious problem solving and our ability to represent information consciously in our working memory is extremely limited. And it's limited in two ways. There are limitations on the amount of information that we can process and use in conscious problem solving using working memory. And there are limitations on the complexity of that information, how complex it can be, how many interrelationships can occur within the information before we start to lose our hold on it. And as a result, a lot of our native human reasoning abilities were designed to solve problems in a way that doesn't tap into that limited information processing that we have in working memory. They make trade-offs and assumptions to avoid the limitations in the amount and complexity of working memory. And that's why they tend to be largely unconscious, automatic, and unlearned. So here's an example of a learned inference. Right? I can ask you, what is 87,220 divided by 7? And you'll probably scratch your head a little bit, let's see, 8 divided by 7, that'll go one time, then 17, that'll be 2, right? And then, let's see, 17, well, that's 14, so that'll be 32 left over, so 28, right? That'll give me 4, 42, that'll give me 6. Takes you a long time to make that inference consciously using your working memory. You've learned how to do it, but it takes time. On the other hand, if I show you this picture, you can almost immediately tell me that this person is feeling nauseous or sick to their stomach. Right? You can do this quickly and easily, almost without thinking, understanding what's going on with somebody else, just by how their body posture is, or their facial expressions, or so on. That's something that we evolved to do quickly, unconsciously, automatically. Whereas solving relatively complex division problems, that isn't something that we evolved to do. So when I talk about the limitations in the amount of information that we can process in working memory, I want to give you in the next lecture module a bunch of examples that I think will illustrate this quite well. So we'll pick that up in the next lecture module.